All right, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and record this for the folks at home. Wave if you can hear me okay. Does that sound good back there? Okay, cool. Very cool. All right. Well, listen, lots to do today. Let's start with, our constant focus that we want to have on how history in the past impacts us today more so than ever, as we're going to see in this particular one. I'm going to go back and just review a couple of things from last time just to get a sense of this. And basically, you guys remember back the ages of discovery, where the European powers were establishing colonies all over the world and exerting their power, their naval power. They were also doing something else. They were inventing, and they created some of the technological marvels of our age. And of course, Captain Cook sailing around the ocean, doing all that kind of stuff. He was using an old chronometer and he's using sails, right? Sails were pretty much it right up until the American Civil War. And during the American Civil War, there was a big change in technology. And the change was actually precipitated with this. It was the steam engine invented in England that allowed what we now call railroads, but also this engine, right, is used to pump um, water out of mines in the beginning. And what kind of mines were they? Well, they were coal mines. Now, coal mines are, it's an important product that burns hot, but it also produces carbon and throws it into the atmosphere. So, what they didn't know what they were doing was really destroying the climate 150 years later. By burning coal in these engines, they started saying, wait a minute, we don't need sails anymore to get around the oceans. Let's just create ocean going steam engines, have coal stations all over the world, and we're going to use the same technology also here to power trains, but we're also going to use the same technology. Here you go, there's some early trains to power the Industrial Revolution, which was the British invention of creating huge manufacturing plants that can make lots of different products, starting with textiles, and that's basically cloth and stuff, but to everything now. Everything's made in plants. And how do you fire those plants? How do you get those plants so all of the gears and everything that are required, everything that has to move, moves? And the way you do it is through steam engines early on. Steam engines were put on ship, but they burn coal. And we kept burning coal and burning coal and more coal. Then we went to electricity. We have coal fired power plants that create most of our electricity, or at least did until a few years ago. And so what happens is this coal burning, this puts this carbon into the atmosphere. You can see it right here. So thick back in those days, you could see it. There was one, for example, in London, they say it's foggy there. It's not foggy in London. It became polluted. And literally, there were weeks at a time when you couldn't literally see your hand extended in front of your face to get down the street. The air was so bad. I grew up in California, where now we have cars, automobiles by this time, early 1960s. No rules, no regulations, no understanding that this was polluting and hurting our lungs and causing asthma and all that kind of stuff. And we were just burning fossil fuels in the engines of our cars to the point where literally there were days you could not breathe. I remember one day laying on the floor with the whole family. Managed to get the Orange Julius. I remember having an Orange Julius in my hand, but the pain, I can still feel the pain of just breathing in, taking a full breath. And it was a lot of these chemicals and things that, are you can't see, like methane and so on, but they're benzene and others, and they just burn your lungs literally. And it's damaging your lungs. Living in California when I was a kid back in the early 60s was like smoking a couple of packs of cigarettes a day as a kid. California changed its laws. It won't allow this anymore. And they have now clear days. You see clear days in London now. They don't allow this burning of coal anymore. But it created a huge problem. And it would create about 150 years after they started with this industrial revolution, would create global climate change. What happens is these carbons, methanes, and others get into the atmosphere, and basically the planet doesn't cool down enough. And we're going through in Utah right now a 20-year drought. This has been a bad year. I'm glad we got this snowstorm a few days ago, man. We need it. I skied as a kid. There was always mountains of snow. We got so much more snow back when I was a kid. It was insane. They didn't have to make artificial snow when I first started skiing in the 1970s. Now you can't ski without artificial snow. They haven't had anything up the ski resorts but artificial snow until this storm here gave them a little bit more of a base, but it's just not the same because there's climate change. So this is world history, modern history impacting us today. What are we going to do about it? Well, fortunately, we got a new president that's taking this on. He announced a raft of the biggest changes I've ever seen come from a president in order to deal with climate change. Never seen anybody be this aggressive. One of the things is the federal government buys lots of cars, tens and thousands of cars a month, because it's a big 1.8 million people work for the federal government. All your military people, they need trucks and vehicles and everything. They're only going to buy electric now. It's all electric. They're going to build an electric grid all across our freeway system. So wherever you go, you can always charge your electric car. And basically, we've got major manufacturers now announcing as of this weekend. This is just this weekend. General Motors, biggest maker of cars and trucks in the United States, biggest maker, is going to go all electric starting 2035. You can't buy a gasoline engine anymore from them for their SUVs and trucks. Well, this is big. This is as big a change as you see in the history of the world, because the whole world's going to follow suit. We pull this off. Germany's already doing it. China produces more windmills and more solar panels than any other country. They're in the lead. And that's where all the new jobs are. All the new jobs aren't coal. You don't want to be a coal miner, do you? To be honest with you. Oil, gas. I mean, these things pollute, but they're also non-renewable. And so this plan is huge. Joining the Paris Climate Change Agreement with all these other countries, trying to get a handle on this thing so we don't ruin the planet even further. It's too late to stop the global warming from taking place. It's already happened. The polar ice caps are the thinnest they've ever been in recorded history since we've been able to keep track in modern times. And the Earth goes through cycles of warming and cooling on its own, but accelerated by man-made problems. And so we'll see if it works. It'll be something you'll have to deal with for the next 150 to 200 years. So it's not like this problem is short term. This is a centuries long problem. And most of world history is calculated in centuries. We have a very narrow focus. What are we going to do this year? Solve these problems this year? You can't solve them this year. It's going to take hundreds of years to see if these plans even work. Okay, so let's go ahead and I'm just going to play a bit of this, but you can get a sense of what President Biden has done and to try to take on this one of his big four problems that he has to deal with right now, including the pandemic. Here we go.
I know the press has just had a long session with the team here about what we're talking about today and this afternoon. And let me just start by saying I can't tell you how much I appreciate the three people standing next to me here for what they've agreed to do to help, particularly my best buddy, John Kerry. Asking a former Secretary of State to come back and do this has been as I know, there's a big ask on the part of myself. I was gonna blame Kamala for it as well, but for both of us. And but John's been deeply involved. The Secretary's been deeply involved in climate issues as a senator and one of the leaders legislatively as well. And I don't think anybody knows more about the issue and the damage that's been done by some of the executive orders of the previous administration. And Gina, you've run everything, Gina. Thank you very much. Let me get to it. Today is Climate Day at the White House, and which means that today is a Jobs Day at the White House. We're talking about American innovation, American products, American labor. And we're talking about the health of our families and cleaner water, cleaner air, and cleaner communities. We're talking about national security, America leading the world in a clean energy future. It's a future of enormous hope and opportunity. It's about coming to the moment to deal with this maximum threat that we exist with that's now facing us, climate change, with a greater sense of urgency. In my view, we've already waited too long to deal with this climate crisis. We can't wait any longer. We see it with our own eyes. We feel it. We know it in our bones. And it's time to act. And I might note parenthetically, if you notice the attitude of the American people toward greater impetus on focusing on climate change and doing something about it has increased across the board, Democrat, Republican, Independent. That's why I'm signing today an executive order to supercharge our administration's ambitious plan to confront the existential threat of climate change. It is an existential threat. Last year, wildfires burned more than 5,000 acres in the West, as no one knows better than the Vice President, former Senator from California, an area roughly the size of the entire state of New Jersey. More intense and powerful hurricanes and tropical storms pummel states across the Gulf Coast and along the East Coast. I can testify to that from Delaware. Historic floods, severe droughts have ravaged the Midwest. More Americans see and feel the devastation in big cities, small towns, coastlines, and in farmlands, in red states and in blue states. And the Defense Department reported that climate change is a direct threat to more than 2/3 of the military's operational critical installations. 2/3. And so this could well be on the conservative side. And many climate and health calamities are colliding all at once. It's not just the pandemic that keeps people inside, it's poor air quality. Multiple studies have shown that air pollution is associated with an increased risk of death from COVID-19. And just like we need a unified national response to COVID-19, we desperately need a unified national response to the climate crisis, because there is a climate crisis. We must lead global response, because neither challenge can be met, as Secretary Kerry has pointed out many times, by the United States alone. We know what to do. We've just got to do it. When we think of climate change, we think of it, this is a case where conscience and convenience cross paths, where dealing with this existential threat to the planet and increasing our economic growth and prosperity are one and the same. When I think of climate change, I think of, and the answers to it, I think of jobs. A key plank of our Build Back Better recovery plan is building a modern, resilient climate infrastructure and clean energy future that will create millions of good-paying union jobs, not $7, $8, $10, $12 an hour, but prevailing wage and benefits. You know, we can put millions of Americans to work modernizing our water systems, transportation, our energy infrastructure to withstand the impacts of extreme climate. We've already reached a point where we're going to have to live with what it is now. That's going to require a lot of work all by itself without it getting any worse. When we think of renewable energy, we see American manufacturing, American workers racing to lead the global market. We see farmers making American agriculture first in the world to achieve net zero emissions and gaining new sources of income in the process. And I want to parenthetically thank the Secretary of Agriculture for helping me put together that program during the campaign. We see small business and master electricians designing, installing, and innovating energy conserving technologies in building homes and buildings. And we're going to reduce electric consumption and save hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in energy costs in the process. And when the previous administration reversed the Obama-Biden vehicle standard and picked big oil companies over American workers, the Biden-Harris administration will not only bring those standards back, will set new ambitious ones that our workers are ready to meet. We see these workers building new buildings, installing 500,000 new electric vehicle charging stations across the country as we modernize our highway system to adapt to the changes that have already taken place. We see American consumers switching to electric vehicles through rebates and incentives, and the residents of our cities and towns breathing cleaner air and fewer kids living with asthma and dying from it. And not only that, the federal government owns and maintains an enormous fleet of vehicles, as you all know. With today's executive order, combined with the Buy American executive order I signed on Monday, we're going to harness the purchasing power of the federal government to buy clean, zero-emission vehicles that are made and sourced by union workers right here in America. With everything I just mentioned, this will mean 1 million new jobs in the American automobile industry, 1 million. And we'll do another thing. We'll take steps towards my goal of achieving 100% carbon pollution-free electric sector by 2035. Transforming the American electric sector to produce power without carbon pollution will be a tremendous spur to job creation and economic competitiveness in the 21st century, not to mention the benefits to our health and to our environment. Already, 84% of all new electric capacity planned to come onto the electric grid this year is clean energy. Clean energy. Why? Because it's affordable, because it's clean, because in many cases it's cheaper, and it's where we're keeping up. They're keeping up. We're going to need scientists and national labs, land-grant universities, historical Black colleges and universities to innovate the technologies needed to generate, store, and transmit clean electricity across distances, and battery technology and a whole range of other things. We need engineers to design them and workers to manufacture them. We need iron workers and welders to install them. Technologies they invent, design, and build will ultimately become cheaper than any other kind of energy, helping us dramatically expand our economy and create more jobs with a cleaner environment. And we'll become the world's largest exporter of those technologies, creating even more jobs. You know, we're also going to build 1.5 million new energy-efficient homes and public housing units that are going to benefit communities 3 times over. 1, by alleviating the affordable housing crisis. 2, by increasing energy efficiency. And 3, by reducing the racial wealth gap linked to home ownership. We're also going to create more than 250,000 jobs to do things like plug the millions of abandoned oil and gas wells that pose an ongoing threat to the health and safety of our communities. They're abandoned wells. They're open now. And we're going to put people to work. We're not going to lose jobs in these areas. We're going to create jobs. They're going to get prevailing wage to cap those over 1 million wells. These aren't pie-in-the-sky dreams. These are concrete, actionable solutions. And we know how to do this. The Obama-Biden administration reduce the auto industry, rescue the auto industry, and help them retool. We need solar energy, cost competitive with traditional energy, weatherizing more. We made it cost competitive, weatherizing more than 1 million homes. The Recovery Act of our the Democratic administration, made record clean energy investments, $90 billion. The president asked me to make sure how that money was spent on everything from smart grid systems to clean energy manufacturing. Now, the Biden-Harris administration is going to do it again and go beyond.
And so that's kind of where we want to stop with you guys. This is, of course, a huge topic for our country, but it's a real opportunity for all of you because you're in a STEM school, science, technology, engineering, and math, and the new jobs that are going to be available creating this massive new system is great. You can't, hang on a second. Got to make sure I plug into power here. You can't just simply make this stuff of the last century and make improvements. It's a lost cause. What isn't a lost cause is all of the new technology and innovation. And that's where all the science technology is. That's where the money's going to go. That's where all the investment's going to be. The Silicon Valley companies, the smart home companies, all that kind of stuff. The Silicon Valley can't wait to invest in this stuff. And so this is a new open door that will change your lives completely. So it's exciting and it's new. And so we look at that and we think, okay, so what's it going to be like? Well, we'll find out because you're living history, but we've always lived history. So let's now kind of jump back in and make the transition now from the Stone Age to the agricultural age, which has a term. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. And that's a fancy term. It's a big term, but it's an important term. It's basically, and some of you missed this in your study guides. And by the way, good turn-in rate. Very happy with how many got their projects in last time. Let's take a quick look while we're still here. Let's take a look at the turn in. We had this. It's actually 58. 58 turned in number 1, 46 number 2, and the third study guide we're up to 36 as of Wednesday afternoon when I grade. So that's where we stand. So that's really good. So keep it up. There's a few that haven't started yet. Not many. Probably time to get going. But your next study guide won't be available, right, until the next lecture. So you've got plenty of time to get caught up if you're behind. So you won't get a new study guide today or tomorrow. You'll get one next lecture and you'll be able to start working on it. In fact, actually, it won't affect you till next week. So plenty of time to get caught up at this particular stage, right? So it's kind of a nice breather. All right, now, the study guide, though, does require us to just get to this Neolithic Revolution to create civilization. And you guys all know ancient history begins with the invention of writing. You guys got that pretty much right. What came before that, though? Lots of creation and innovation. What a lot of people think, oh, civilization just started one day and it all happened magically then. No, writing was after all these other key things had been invented first. So we talk about the origin of humanity coming from the ancestral homeland in South Africa, and then expanding across the planet in rather slow stages by today's standards. I mean, we're literally talking 200,000 years between coming from Africa and arriving into the Americas, the Native Americans that were here when Columbus came. So, and even later, for example, down here in New Zealand, 50,000 years ago, and the Aboriginal people arrived here in Australia. So it was a gradually slow thing, and you can track it by the tools and technologies. And then we also have carbon dating. You know when something was created, right? By its carbon signature. And then also to DNA. If you go to ancestry.com and trace your DNA down, wherever it happens to come from, you'll be really surprised, you know, for example, we come out of this part of Europe and here to Scotland. And that's just, man, we got a lot of Neanderthal in there, a lot of Viking kinds of things. It's a lot of fun to trace that. But this is the thing. All of this is showing us that the old Stone Age, right? There were major climate changes then too, and ecological changes. You guys all know about the asteroid that hit the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs. You guys know all about that. And it was during this time period, we're talking about 2.5 million to 12,000 BCE, where people were going through a lot of morphological change. This Paleolithic Stone Age, the old Stone Age, would go for 1 million years or more. And it's like humanity kind of limped along, didn't really, you know, grow very fast. Toward the end of it, in a place in France, we talked about the Chauvet Caves already, 30,000 BP. These people weren't stupid. They weren't dumb. They were as bright as, you probably had the same intellectual ability that we have today. They certainly were the artists. They just had limited technologies, and they were basically pioneering life. How did they live? They lived in kinship groups mainly. So it's your family and extended family. So your family, extend that out a little bit, it's called a clan. And a clan then grows, and there's tribes. So these family, clan, and tribal relationships are really what dominate all of the Stone Age times. They would, as families, have their own ceremonies, their own religion, their own astronomy, their own gods, this kind of stuff. It gets pretty complex. Here's Stonehenge right here. I don't know if you know this, but it's a complete observational observatory built in the Stone Age. They hauled all these stones and put them in place in the Stone Age. They didn't have cranes. How they did it, I don't know, but they drug them hundreds of miles to get these stones there, so they could have an accurate view of the cosmos. A lot of people think this is simply an astronomical observatory used for religious ceremonies. You line it all up and you know where the planets are. A lot of people still live in, not a lot of people, but quite a few spots in the world still live in this Stone Age type of lifestyle. And it's not so strange, really. Here is someone from New Guinea. Now, New Guinea developed the Neolithic Revolution of agriculture. They realized, you know, you just don't hunt and gather stuff, you actually grow stuff. But the thing with New Guinea, it's so easy to grow stuff that they didn't really have to get really complex about it. The other four civilizations we're going to talk about, we're talking about Mesopotamia, we're talking about Egypt, we're talking about China, we're talking about India. They had to work together in large groups that go beyond clan, beyond tribe, to do the technology necessary to harness those rivers to make agriculture possible. Not so in New Guinea. New Guinea, its climate is such that it'll grow anything. And so all basically, once you figure out what crops you want to keep producing, you can do it without a lot of fuss and bother. So therefore, they could still continue to live in their clans and in their tribes. And these are all the different tribal regions in New Guinea today. It's north of Australia. All right, here's some folks today. These are today. This isn't made up. Here is a tribe consisting of clans and family groups banding together to literally go to war against the tribe across the hill. Their warfare is different than our warfare. Their warfare is more like playing lacrosse. You yell and scream a lot. You shoot a few arrows. Somebody gets hit in the bottom, and that's it. Okay, it's over. Somebody's been injured. Stop. Now, some of these tribes are a little more warlike. There are, peoples, if you go back quite a ways, maybe 30, 40, 50 years, some of them were cannibals. Oh, that's not so good to know. But nevertheless, that's, of course, done away with. But a lot of people are still living in this tribal mentality. Here's their arrows, here's their bows. They've been doing this for 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 years. Same thing in some of the more remote regions of the Amazon, where people are still living this tribal Aboriginal lifestyle. We use the term Aboriginal. Here is a typical Native American from the forest in the Amazon, still hunting and gathering the way they would 10,000, 15,000 years ago. I had a friend of mine who traveled to this region, and he said, happiest people I ever met were here. These people weren't unhappy. They're not sitting down, gee, I wish I was civilized. In fact, they're looking at civilization like there's a lot of negatives with civilization. And these people also did a lot of things, like domesticated the first animals that we take for granted. We have a lovely dog, love our dog, couldn't survive without our lovely little dog. Where did it come from? Came from this time period. You guys got this right in your study guides. I was very pleased how many got this answer right. Mesolithic, Neolithic, and Chalcolithic, they are basically domesticating animals. The dog became our companion, and every dog on the planet now is the descendant, however hybridized and changed over time by man's manipulation here, from a gray wolf. All dogs are wolves, but they've been domesticated, and we get more breeds every year. But this started way back. They used to use dogs more for defense, but also for hunting and for other types of things. The Romans loved their dogs because they went out and ate all the garbage out of the street. So that was how they survived. Different every era, like in medieval times, dogs were for hunting and warfare and things. Today they're pets, but this is the group that started it. And every region of the world, India, China, North America, Europe, had their different breeds that they've done. For example, the Husky in Alaska. All right, now there's others. Sheep. There have been lots of domesticated sheep. And of course, you have to move the sheep, to pastures and so on. Goats, pigs, chickens, cows, camels, horses, all those are important. But this was all done by Mesolithic, Neolithic, and Chalcolithic peoples. Here is a famous kind of mural in Egyptian inside a tomb, where they're showing, here they are milking the cows, right? Cows were very important in Egypt. So here's the civilization now taking the cow and still keeping them, maybe now in pens and having to bring food to them, where they used to, as nomads, would wander with them. But the milk of a cow can be used for cosmetics. It can be used for drinking. It can be used for all sorts of products. And so that becomes kind of an important thing. And so I love this Egyptian mural of how important this are. Now, these people who domesticated animals tended to be migratory peoples, hunting and gathering types. And they would take their herds, like here's a bunch of yaks, they would take their herds and migrate them. We do it here still in Utah today. We take cattle up into the high mountain regions of the forest during the summer and bring them down to the valleys for the winter, where we grow hay and food for them, corn sometimes, to fatten them up in the winter so they don't lose their weight. We're still doing it. We're still migrating animals in Utah today. This is in opposition to the sedentary people. The migratory people, the nomads, moving from one place to the next with their herds, like the Mongols in Mongolia, with their horses, constantly looking for new pastures and whatever, because the horses eat everything in one location, so you got to move to another, right? The agriculturalists, though, are people who are now starting to settle down in one place and grow their food in one place, and they grow enough food they don't have to leave. This kind of starts with a few small villages, is all. And these are two different types of people. They have different values, different needs, and so on. Village people versus nomadic people. Now, none of these people are civilized yet. Civilization is the development of a specific culture. We talk about American culture, German culture, Japanese culture, whatever. Civilization is a particular lifestyle, and it is not what these two boys are living right here. Here, these boys are living. Look at the herd that they've got going. They live on horseback, they migrate, they travel. They're having a great time, by the way. These are modern pictures of nomadic people in the present day country of Iran, still living that traditional lifestyle. Obviously, dogs were very important in terms of herding animals. I don't know if you've ever done this or not, but go up to Soldier Hollow, the ski area. But in the summer, they have sheep dogs competing and herding sheep. It's a riot. It is so much fun to see. They domesticated certain dogs for different reasons. One can herd sheep, and some do better with cows, and some do better just keeping wolves and other animals away. But here they are living combat intense. So you have to take everything with you. Here's a nomad on a donkey with his two dogs out here, and they've obviously got some goats that this guy's taking care of. This is again in Iran today, present day. Look at that tent. Don't you love that tent? Meanwhile, right here in Utah, I get this experience twice a year because I do a lot of cycling, and I get out on this one trail, and all of a sudden there is, well, let's put it this way, lots of droppings from sheep all over the trail. It's like, okay, stop, turn around, go back. What's happened is for the last 150 years here in Utah, sheep have been brought from one part where it's warmer, and then they're pushed up here, in the winter, and they're pushed up here in the summer, and they migrate across this trail, and they've got somebody who speaks Basque, Spanish, actually, a version of Spanish, who has been doing this in his family generation to generation, living in, normally their little caravans that they would use were shaped like this. Now they're, of course, pulled by pickup trucks, but they look kind of the same, and they're still herding sheep. This guy comes up, I'm sitting there, I got sheep all around me, and he comes up and he's got his two dogs with him, and they're moving. One guy is moving with his two dogs, are moving at least 300-400 sheep right past me up the hills and coming back down again. This lifestyle's still there. And if you like wool, if you like to eat mutton or lamb or whatever, this is still a very important industry. And of course, Aboriginal peoples in America, in the United States, have been given reservations. This was a very unfortunate part of history. This is what used to be, all this land used to be belong to them, taken over by the Western Europeans as they pushed them out into smaller and smaller areas, which we now call reservations. But nonetheless, this is where our Aboriginals descendants still live. For example, in the Navajo Reservation, which is the nation's biggest. Do you know down there, they had a whole bunch of coal-fired power plants. They provided electricity. That's how they made a lot of money to Southern California. California said, we're not buying it anymore. It's got to be renewable. They have shut those all down, and now are putting up solar panels and putting up windmills on what they call the Kapowowitz Plateau to generate that electricity now with renewables. So the Navajo Reservation down here, while remote, is a powerhouse when it comes to producing the new fuels of the future. So good for them. And that's a good use of a lot of that land down there. So let's wish them well. But they had a lot of coal, so they provided that for, well, I don't know, probably 40 years. But now they've abandoned that as of last year and are now going all renewable on the reservation. And that's one big revenue stream, lots of jobs created for those folks down there on the reservation. They've also had a really bad time of it down here with the COVID. pandemic. It's been really rough in down here, more so than in here in northern Utah. All right. Well, now these people also, now we're talking about the prehistoric peoples now. Prehistoric peoples also did the whole metal thing. I only had 2 students that missed this and said civilization created bronze. No, they didn't. Okay. This was done before them, long before them, and also the Iron Age and so on. And we talked about the early and the middle and late Bronze Age, and you guys had a nice reading on that. But that changes their weapons, it changes their things they used for food, all that kind of stuff. The Iron Age, you guys read about it. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but they did learn that iron takes a higher melting point than, say, tin and copper, but you can also add some carbon content to it and produce steel, although it's really hard to do. And they were doing it in ancient times for some swords, but it was rare. The thing that makes iron so much better is that it's cheaper. There's more of it. You can mine it easier. And it's easier to sharpen. With copper and tin making bronze, you have to basically melt it down again and reforge the weapon. So iron has a lot of advantages. Okay. Anyway, just saying some things that maybe you don't need to know right now, but hopefully you got right on your study guide. Again, they lived in families, clans, and tribes. They had their own ceremonies, their own religion. Every tribe would have had its own gods. It would have been that kind of thing. Jumping ahead. These are people that lived before written records. That's why we call them prehistoric. And we use a lot of terms to describe them: primitive, primeval, primordial, ancient, antediluvian, aboriginal. Some of these terms are, well, let's put it this way, offensive, because they weren't primitive. But they were aboriginal. That's a good term to use. And they were smart, and they did a lot of things that make our world possible. So all of this happened to develop this culture, which we now call civilization. Now, civilization has a specific definition. It's a certain set of things beyond just writing. Okay? So as we talk about the first of these civilizations, start to take a little bit of mental note. Of course, it's all in the lecture here, and there is a reading, by the way, on it, as to what makes civilization different than the times I just talked to you about: the nomadic life, the Stone Age life, the early, eras of iron and bronze. And what makes this different? Part of it's the scale and the fact that tribe melts down, clans melt down. It's bigger. It's a bigger scale. Why? It takes lots of people, lots of effort to make a civilization work and grow. And it's just a different way of living. It's as different as living on the farm today and working in a factory. 2 very different lifestyles. Rural lifestyle versus living in a city. If you have friends or family that live in rural areas, their whole lifestyle is different. Everything, what they do for fun is different. You come to a city, whole different set. You live in a city, you're an urban dweller. Very few of you have grown up on a working farm in a real agricultural area, right? You live along the Wasatch Front, one of the most densely populated centers in the country. Utah County, Salt Lake County, Davis County, highly dense population. How dense? You can tell how dense it's getting. Population density, you can tell by how high the apartment complexes get. We used to not have more than 2 stories on an apartment complex. Now we're getting 5, 7, 10, 13. Much more concentrated living in big apartment complexes. Housing subdivisions, less land between houses. This is called urban density. And to create a civilization, you have to have urban density, because you have to have a lot more people than you would need to support yourself in a migratory pattern. Plus, you need the Stone Age people from the New Stone Age to have invented something first. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. It happened about 10,000 years ago, and it was done by Stone Age people, not civilized people. Civilized people just didn't walk up one day and say, hey, let's invent agriculture and start something new. No, the agriculture had already started. on a small village level in these little sedentary communities. These people are going to make it bigger on a grander scale. What this is this. It's called the Neolithic Revolution. The most important term I've taught you today, the Neolithic Age, the Neolithic Revolution. It's an agricultural revolution that starts in Turkey above the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, the Tigris and Euphrates. Basically, there was a form of wheat, kind of low yield by today's standards, called immer. Now, this they realized as the hunting and gathering peoples that they could harvest every year and, maybe even make some things like bread and pitas and things like that with it by grinding it and mixing it with water and other things. But then they have some of these seeds with us. So you harvest them, you take them with you. Maybe some of them fall on the ground. I don't know how this would happen. Or maybe you think, hey, I'm just going to throw these in the ground, see what happens. You cover them up, you get a flood. The next year, it comes up in abundance somewhere else. And then you realize, wait a minute, if I plant where the flood's been, this stuff's going to come up every single year, and it is delicious. It is nutritious. And oh, by the way, you can actually make alcohol with it too, which is a byproduct, but that is one of the theories. The reason civilization began is because they could do so much with these products, including make beer. I don't buy that theory. I don't think that was what created civilization in huge cities, but there is one theory out there that alcohol became a big catalyst for grouping this large scale agriculture. So you can not only feed yourself, but you could have surplus for other things like beer. For me, though, it's more that the surplus that's created by planting these kinds of things in certain areas and learning how to hybridize them so that the yields are bigger. Every year, the flood creates fertilizer. If you planted this same product in a field that didn't get any flooding, it would grow less and less every year. They would have noticed this. But if you plant it in areas that have been flooded, it gives you a yield and abundance. And it's that surplus that allows a lot of things to happen, including the building of cities and towns. And that is one of the key things that comes out of this revolution in agriculture caused by our prehistoric ancestors. Now look at this chart. This is the size of the world population over the last 12,000 years. I love this chart. Let's go 4 million to 10,000 BCE. So let's start with 10,000. It's virtually a flat line. They're not growing very fast, extremely incrementally. Along comes here the invention of agriculture sometime between here and here. And notice that the line starts to budge gradually upward. With the Neolithic Revolution, it means more people can eat and survive. By the time we get to the invention of writing, which is about right in here, the population starts to increase. By their standards, leaps and bounds. By our standards, it's kind of still getting off the ground. Now, listen, here we go to the year 0, which is the height of the Roman Empire. That is a huge change in population. The Roman Empire maybe had as many as 50 million people in it at its height. But look what's happened since. You kind of get through the Middle Ages, you got some pandemics in there, the Black Death and a few things like that. But by the time we get to modern world, look at the population increase. That's your supply chain we keep talking about. That's bringing products from all over the world. That is creating an economy based on these new civilized things. And it really started to hit its stride after the medieval period. And we're looking at 2019, 7.7 billion people. Do you realize that's more people live today than existed in all ancient times put together? This number is going to go higher. Some estimate it might go to 15 billion. Why? Because we can produce enough food to feed them. Oh yeah, we have vaccines and we can do things like that. The thing is, this idea that you can scale up agriculture and make it bigger and increase your population beyond what you could do as a tribe or as a clan with your sheep moving up and down through the mountains every year happened in 6 places. Not in New Guinea, not in the Amazon. It would happen in Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley, the Yellow River in China, Then in Mesoamerica, that's Mexico and Guatemala, and then in Peru. Now notice the time periods here. 3,500 BCE, 3,000, 2,500, 2,000, 1,500, and 1,200. This is approximately when their civilization reached a point where you could call it a civilization, and they would have invented writing as part of that. Because when you produce large amounts of crops, you have to keep track of it all. You have to trade for it, sell for it. You have to have records. You have to know what you did last year so you can see how you can improve on it next year. You have to study your environment to make sure that this keeps producing year after year after year. You have to do astronomical observations to know when the seasons are. You got to know when you think the flood's going to come and when it should recede. You have to put it all together. The astronomy, the writing, the technology, the food production, and you have to organize a society so a group of people can all do this together. And you're getting a lesson in that now. You're lesson in that now, how societies have to work together or they fall apart, is this COVID crisis. Everybody wearing masks, everybody social distancing, working toward a vaccine. It's a worldwide effort keeping our civilization of the world together to go to the next phase, and dealing with climate change too. Because guess what? All of this agriculture created some climate change. Methane, one of the big gases that's messing up our environment. You know what? It's animals. All of the animals, humans included. So much methane. Oh, by the way, methane's been captured in the Arctic, frozen in the tundra, is now, because of global warming, being released. The climate change has already happened. It's what do we do with it now that we have to live with it? And how do we maybe slow it down? And all those problems started right back here. So we live in a very connected history. So that's kind of a good place to stop, I think, right now for today. I don't know what the time is, but I think like that's a good place to stop here with this. Oh no, we got time. Hang on. I didn't think we had that much time left. Let's go back to sharing the screen, because I do have a couple more slides that would fit right here. Okay, so we'll share that and we'll go back up to the view. Okay, I thought we were pretty much out of time there. Anyway, here are the places I just mentioned. Okay, so these are the big six, right? Now, 4 of them are the original ancient civilizations. These happened relatively new, right? And so, yeah, but they all developed independently of each other. So you know the locations. Here's the first one, Mesopotamia. Then we go to the Nile. Then we go to India. Then we go to China. Then we come here to Mexico and Panama, and Mexico and Guatemala. And then we go down through basically Peru and Ecuador. Okay, the Inca civilization. And each of these developed writing, developed civilization, developed this massive scale agriculture survival kind of thing independently. Yes, there was some trade, especially among these 4 here. There would have been some trade here, but they did it themselves. They invented it, the Neolithic Revolution. Now, the Neolithic Revolution, the first phase of it, starts about 10,000 BCE, so roughly 12,000 years ago. And I told you it started here in Turkey, right? Where they had that emmer, that wheat, that they realized, hey, it can grow places. Now, notice too, you got these rivers here, but you have a thing in this region called the Fertile Crescent. Why is that important? Well, there's enough rainfall at the time in this part of history to allow agriculture to expand and thrive in these locations before civilization started. This Fertile Crescent remains fertile to this day. For example, you have in Israel, current day Israel, right in here, you have the Sea of Galilee, you have the Jordan River, you have the Dead Sea. There's water essentially. It's a good Mediterranean climate, will grow almost anything. And then you have rainfall and so on in this area. So it's a very fertile crescent. Now, what's going to happen is these little villages, they're going to pass this technology on to some people living down here called the Sumerians, and this is when civilization starts. But these little squares you see here are all sites, archaeological digs, like we talked about last time, where they have dug up Neolithic peoples inventing agriculture. They were sedentary sites. And so they could, 10,000, 12,000 years ago, these people would have been living in these villages. All right, now, this whole idea of the Neolithic Revolution kind of starts here and spreads to Egypt, spreads to India, spreads to Asia. Now, when it goes to different places, new products are brought onto the scene, right? So for example, when they get to India, there's a product in Southeast Asia called rice that finds its way to India, finds its way to China. But in northern China, they're better growing things called wheat, barley, millet, and soybeans. So millet and soybeans come from China. We use a lot of soybeans in the world today. All of this would spread through Europe, where they would get a taste of the Neolithic Revolution and villages would become sedentary and they start growing their own products and so on. And when you get to Africa, wheat and barley's added, and the yams, they would come up with yams. You get, for example, Southeast Asia too, these folks we just showed you earlier, down in Borneo, or we're looking at New Guinea, they came up with bananas. Thank goodness, I love my bananas every morning, rice and yams. In the Americas, guess what? The Peruvians added potatoes. That's kind of a big one. And then maize, corn, you would know it as corn, and beans, and lots of peppers and things came from this part of Mesoamerica. Lots of other things too, like chia seeds and all that kind of stuff. Lots of products coming from Mexico and from the Andes Mountains. Each one would grow a different mix of food, but it all started here and kind of spread its way across the planet. And then as new products were invented in different places, some of them would grow in different places and away they go. For example, the banana was brought to Central America, and now that's where we get most of our bananas from. There's a concept here, which is kind of interesting, and it's called the fall of man. Basically, early agriculture could support far more people per square mile than hunting ever could. It also allowed people to settle more permanently in one area. The system was not, though, easy. In fact, in many ways, life was harder. Agriculture required more regular work, at least of men, than hunting did. With hunting, you went out, you hunted, you got yourself a big mastodon, you ate on it for the next month. You only had to work a few hours a day in a hunting society. Hunting groups today, such as the Pygmies of Kalahari and Desert in West Africa that still live this way, they basically work an average of 2.5 hours a day. In agriculture, it's 10 to 12. All right, that's a good place. We'll start with the fall next time. That's a good place to stop. All right, see you guys later.